Hi everyone, we continue with a series dedicated to the analysis of the games of our users, and this one was submitted by the user with the nickname Shancler. So let's get to it. In this game, you were playing with white pieces and you started with a d4 and your opponent responded with a c5. So immediately undermining the d4, the drawback being that you can grab the space with the d5 move. It's not a big problem, I think, for black because there are different openings where black actually undermines this pawn at the early stage of the game. For instance, if we talk about the more common order of moves, it is knight to f6, let's say c4, c5, and d5. We can see that in this case, we get the position from your game, right? But the order of moves actually matters. So in my opinion, in your game, after d4, c5, and d5, and black's knight to f6, you had a pleasant choice. So you made a c4 move, which looks pretty natural, and it's definitely not a mistake whatsoever. But you should understand that, well, sometimes you can use this square not only for your pawn, but for your piece as well. And I'm talking about this particular pawn structure, which is typical for Benoni systems. So I'm talking about leaving this c4 not occupied and choosing something like knight to c3 here. Of course, it's a question of taste, but I'm just going to give you a few ideas here. So after that, you are developing the piece and you prepare the e4 move, just grabbing the center just as usual. But the thing is, c4 remains empty, so at some point, let's imagine black continues with something like, I don't know, g6, you play e4, black plays d6. Now position is looking more like, you know, the one from Perk defense or something like that. But the thing is, well, c4 is empty and you may use it for the knight. So the typical maneuver for Benoni type pawn structures is something like knight f3, then at some point knight to d2, and then knight to c4. Obviously, you have to control b5 additionally with the a4 to prevent black's counterplay based on b7, b5. But the thing is, the knight on c4 will be quite active. It will exert some pressure on d6 in advance because black's typical plan here is to undermine d5 with the e6 if b5 doesn't work. And then it weakens d6 pawn, and, well, you need pieces to attack it, and the knight from c4 will do exactly that. And from c4, the knight will also support e4, e5. So it's a great position for this piece, and it's only possible because you didn't occupy that square with a pawn. So, I mean, if black starts with the knight to f6, obviously, you cannot put your knight on c3 here if you want to play main lines, right? So if you want to play typical c4 stuff, you already have to play c4 here, right? Well, in this case, your opponent made you a favor, so you could have chosen this knight to c3. But again, in many cases, it's just a question of taste. I think from a practical point of view, it's an interesting idea to avoid this Benko or Volga gambit stuff altogether. You reduce the number of opening lines you have to learn, for example. Anyway, you played c4, not a bad move whatsoever. Your opponent responded with the b5, which is the start of the Benko or Volga gambit. Pretty sharp opening, quite interesting for both colors, but it is considered a better one for white anyway. But after c takes b5, I was really surprised to see your opponent playing queen to a5 check. So the normal move here is just to undermine the pawn again, to open both the b and a files for heavy pieces, and that is a typical compensation for missing pawn here for black. So black gets pretty much free development here for the pieces, although white has more space. But because of, you know, the open files here and a lot of empty squares on the queen side, after all these operations, black has no problems with the development. And then at some point, after completing the development, bring the bishop to this long diagonal, black tries to occupy b and a files and exert pressure on these pawns. So in many cases, white has no problems with keeping the extra material, but black will have also concrete play on this A and B files, and in many cases white is struggling to complete the development. or if the development is completed, then to get something more tangible out of the extra pawn, because, you know, black has some pressure. But with the accurate play, again, as I said before, white should get the advantage. But your opponent made this strange move, queen to a5. In my opinion, queen is completely misplaced here. And what's interesting, the queen is just forcing your knight to c3, which is an amazing square for it anyway. Supporting e4, supporting d5, and protecting b5. So queen a5 check is, in my opinion, completely bad idea. And the next move is also just awful, honestly. So there's knight to e4, one move threat, so typical one move threats. The move that looks active, that creates a threat of some sort, but long term, positionally, it is nothing. In this particular case, it is bad even from a tactical point of view. So here you could have played something that I think is an amazing option of just simplifying the things and getting the clearest advantage possible. It is basically the queen to a4 move. So attacking the queen and the knight simultaneously and leaving black no chances to avoid the exchange of queens here, which means after queen takes a4 and knight takes a4, you simply have extra pawn and all the advantages you had before. So advantage in space, probably advantage in development, because now you have a threat of just attacking the knight with, say, f3 move, and c5 is under pressure. But what's really cool is that you can use the vulnerability of the knight in e4 to play f3, followed by e4, grabbing the space, grabbing the center, and literally having no drawbacks. So extra material and positional advantage simultaneously. Absolutely winning position. So I believe that was practically the best possible decision here. Bishop d2 is also a possibility, the move you made, I mean, but it still gives black some counterplay. Of course, for getting this counterplay, black should take the bishop. So to have at least the bishop pair and some control over dark squares. So that is what I would have played here for sure. So knight d2, queen d2, and then, for example, g6, typical move, preparing the development of the bishop to g7, occupying the long diagonals, pretty much in the spirit of Volga Gambit or Banco Gambit, call it whatever you want. So that's what black had to play for sure, because what black did, regained the material, so black captured on c3, but let's have a look what black lost because of this operation. Black lost the possibility to normally develop the bishop with the help of g6 and bishop g7. Now there is a serious problem because of your monster on c3. So it's not even a bishop, it's a monster. And black is also losing great amount of tempi because you continue with the e4, attacking the queen. Black has no counterplay now in the center, so you completely control the central situation. I mean, it's probably already a lost position for black positionally. But you should understand that if black would have played this knight e2, it would have been not so clear. That's why I believe that your bishop d2 was actually a bad decision. So, knight c3, bishop c3, queen b5, e4. The rest is pretty clear to me. So you continued with the knight to f3. What can be more natural in this situation? Good move, good decision. Then bishop went to a6. And here you surprised me with this g3 move because to me it's not so obvious. Of course, if you've learned Banco or Volga Gambit from white's perspective, it should be pretty typical idea for you to try to play g3 and bishop g2 and stuff. But in this particular position, I think a bit more natural is just to play castling as soon as possible. But I can understand why you were a bit concerned because, for example, after something like bishop to e2, you may have been worried about some tricks like queen to g6, I can imagine. Attacking e4 and g2, I believe it's absolutely lost for black if you simply castle here, because black is just not developed whatsoever. But, well, I can imagine why you could have probably decided to start with the g3 just to make sure that both pawns won't be hanging together, right? So at least one of them will be hanging, but you will have enough resources to protect it. But we should understand that if black doesn't take on f1 here, then white is probably not going to play something like bishop to g2 or bishop to h3, developing the bishop, because in that case, that bishop on a6 will be quite annoying, preventing white from castling, and that is exactly what white wants to do here. So another interesting idea was probably just to take the bishop, but in that case, queen takes, and again, you have some problems with castling. So maybe g3 is a good start, so then you can think of playing something like bishop e2, next move, and you're not worried about hanging pawn. I guess g3 is fine. So bishop captured on f1 though, so your opponent definitely helped you with implementing what you wanted. Now after simple king f1, your king gets absolutely typical position on g2, typical for this opening, I would say. So you're making castling manually, which is completely fine. Black responded with the e6, again, against all the rules, but to be completely honest, it's hard to criticize black for decisions already here, because position is just terrible. So there is no clear way how to complete the development of the king side. Castling queen side would be just a suicide. So yeah, e6 is probably not worse than anything else here. King to g2, e takes d5. But anyway, it's really interesting to see how black is actually helping you on each and every move, right? So like every move simplifies your task, because you may have thought of you know, how to open up a position against the king, which is just stuck in the center, right? And here comes this e6 followed by ed5, actually opening the e file against it. So your decision of taking with the pawn is the most natural here. Although in similar situations, of course, if there is no such a case like you know, a back king on the e file, white could have considered taking with the queen. It's also a good move here, but I think ed5 is just much more straightforward and much more efficient. What is the idea behind taking with the piece, not necessarily with the queen in a similar situation? You just keep the d file open, and after this e6 and ed5, what happens? Black is creating this amazing weakness. It's not only about the pawn, it's also the d6 square, right? So both are terribly weakened by black's action of playing e6, ed5. And you keep the d file open so that you have a better access to those squares. And we should also understand that in this particular case, you have the d5 not occupied with the pawn. Again, it's the same thing like with the pawn on c4 at the very beginning. So if there is no pawn, you can use that square for your piece, right? Here it's even better case because it's already a square in opponent's camp, and it will be just an amazing outpost for many pieces, for different pieces, including queen. Well, but again, in this particular case, ed5 is the best one because, come on, the e file should be open. This way you can start the attack. And what's interesting, there is already a threat of playing something like queen to e1 check. And if, for example, black plays king to d8, there is bishop to a5, winning the queen. So your opponent played queen to g6. I'm not sure if your opponent predicted this queen e1 threat, but well, queen to g6 fortunately saved the queen for your opponent. So after rook e1 check, king to d8, bishop to a5, and king to c8, well, the queen is safe, but it doesn't mean that position is any better, right? So after rook to e8, again, very natural move, king to b7 and queen to b3. So I like the way you attack here because you give your opponent no time to respond with some sort of defense. So each move is a tempo move, each move is just a check. Very good. But after king to a6, I believe you missed a very simple win and again made a serious inaccuracy. I mean, it doesn't affect the result of the game because your position is already completely winning. But nevertheless, so I want you to try to use this situation as an exercise. So your task is just to find the best move for white, which leads to winning the game faster than anything else. For that, just stop the video and start it again whenever you think you're ready. And the solution here is the a4 move. Basically, it's not that hard to find it, because if we ask ourselves a question here, so the king is completely limited. What do we need to deliver a checkmate, right? We would almost instantly find this square b5 from where the king can be checkmated. The only missing element here is something that supports the queen there. And a4 fixes it, right? So after a4, there is a threat of queen b5. King takes a5 obviously doesn't change a thing because of queen to b5 checkmate anyway. So bishop is invulnerable in this particular case. And yeah, it's over. Just over immediately, because black doesn't have a satisfactory defense except for something really bad like queen b6. And you win without questions here. You don't need to sacrifice anything, just win on the spot. That's it. So a4 is the easiest one. So you play queen a4. That is the first moment where I really disagree with your choices during this conversion stage. So your opponent played f5, attacking the rook. I'm not sure if you have noticed it immediately that the rook is hanging, but yeah, you could have missed out, because indeed everything is about the king on the queen side right now. But anyway, it's important to keep track of changes and see what happens after each and every opponent's move. In this particular case, well, again, I believe there are different possibilities that white can try. For example, the easiest one is just to protect the rook here with rook a to e1. It's the only piece which is not participating right now. Would be natural just to bring it to the game. And the power of your position here is that your rook controls the back rank, so your opponent cannot really develop his pieces. And you still have the same threat of bishop c7 if you want to implement that idea. You now have some additional threats like rook e6 at some point. So everything is still great, but now you have all the pieces participating in the attack, right? And what's interesting, you can make this decision almost instantly, so you don't have to calculate anything here. So bishop c7 requires some calculation. Of course, if you realize that your rook on e8 is under attack. So bishop to c7, well, the next move is just forced. It is king to b7. Now you have two pieces hanging. Once again, it's not a problem whatsoever. But after rook a to e1, you kind of eliminate unnecessary calculation, right? You still have this winning position, but nothing is heading in your camp. So from a practical point of view, it's a much better choice. And after king to b7, you came up with a very strong move. I mean, in this particular case, it's definitely the best one. But from a practical point of view, again, I don't think it's the right decision. So what is the easiest solution in this position? You have kind of two pieces hanging, and you've been playing the rapid game. I'm not sure what was the timing at that moment. So were you in a time trouble or not? How much time did you have on the clock? But in any case, I mean, if you play a shorter time control, or for example, in a real game, you know, you have a clear way to absolutely decisive advantage, requiring no risk whatsoever. In many cases, it's the best practical decision. So in this particular case, for example, rook takes b8 is, in my opinion, the easiest way to win the game. So rook b8, it's forced, and king b8 is also forced. And then you just take a pawn on d7. So just look at this position. It's absolutely lost for black. You have extra pawn. Your opponent's king is completely exposed. So there is no chance for black to somehow solve this problem. So it's just a constant weakness, the king. There is an amazing problem with light squares in general, and so on. And what's interesting, black has no counterplay whatsoever, and you don't have to calculate a single bit here. So the next play is as simple as just bringing the rook, which is not participating in the game at the moment, to the active position. That's it, just rook e1, and if queen takes d5, just rook e8 again. So if black develops the bishop here, there is rook e6, also just simply winning position. No, risk, no problems at all. And once again, something like that, like rook to b8, is a decision that you make in seconds. So you don't have to calculate anything. So just super forced line. Rook b8, bishop b8, king b8, queen d7. That's it. Extra pawn, and then evaluation, of course. The key moment is just to evaluate the position. What's going on? I have extra pawn after queen takes d7. There is still this problem with the king. My opponent has no counterplay whatsoever. That's it. That's enough to make this decision, right? You made a brilliant rook to e6 move here, and it does work tactically. But again, when you make such a decision, you have to calculate everything till the end. Otherwise, you are at risk of just losing absolutely winning position. Why? Because you sacrifice the whole rook, right? So after d takes e6, you have to calculate everything till the end. So you have to make sure you deliver the attack you have delivered, which is, by the way, not very obvious. Or, for example, you have a forced way to checkmate opponent or get the decisive material advantage or something, right? So in this particular case, for example, bishop b8 is probably a guarantee of the decisive material advantage, because if rook b8, there is just a checkmate on c6, and if king takes on b8, then you gradually get to the rook. And once again, even here, if king goes back to b8, you need something concrete like knight e5, knight e7, and all of this should be calculated before you make rook e6 move. Not like I make rook e6 move and then we will see what's going to happen. It's not going to work in a normal tournament game. It's not going to work in the other position even, because there may be a nuance that actually neutralizes your attack and you miss it, and then you spoil the otherwise absolutely winning game, right? Absolutely winning position. That's why I say that this decision, although brilliant, in fact, is not a good one from a practical point of view, because it's not needed. In general, I'm a fan of the approach that, well, I use sacrifices when they are super clear and lead to absolutely clear advantage, decisive advantage. I'm able to calculate everything till the end. Or I just try to find an easier solution. And I'm talking about positions with clear advantage already, okay? Because sometimes when you have a worse position, obviously you need to search for something extraordinary. But if you already have clearly winning position like this one, you just don't need a sacrifice. So sacrifice is always a risk. You don't need risk in a clearly winning position. That's my point. All right, so rook e6, your opponent captured. Obviously, there is nothing better. And you didn't take on b8. You just played d6, which appeared not that bad. But obviously, bishop b8 was a clearer solution. Because here, if black captures on d6 and then plays queen to e8, well, obviously, white should be still winning here because white is just an exchange down. But the king is so weak that it's just a question of several moves to checkmate it, but still, this gave black some chances, and this position required some concrete play from you. And pay attention, what I really dislike about this position is that your rook is still not in the game, which is not correct. So when you perform the attack, all the pieces should be in this attack, and it could have been done easily here on the move 19, just rook a to e1, and come on. All the pieces are participating. But anyway, position is so great that after d6, it's still winning, although your opponent, again, missed the best defense and played king to c8. And here you finished the game with the help of knight e5, queen f6, and finally bishop captures on b8, creating sort of queen c6, and queen d7, and there is no satisfactory defense for your opponent. So, all in all, a good game. But pay attention to several moments. So first, all the pieces should be in the game. try to avoid situations like here with the rook on a1. Then don't forget about easier solutions. So whenever you have a clearly winning position, just search for a simple solution. Those were two here, like rook b8 at the end and a4 at this moment, right? You don't need to overcomplicate the things, just checkmate the king, that's it. And probably the most important thing, don't overestimate the beauty, so to say. So you're not playing chess to produce some, beautiful combinations or something. So you're playing chess to win your games, right? And sometimes, something really simple is indeed the most beautiful thing you can do. Thanks a lot for watching this. I hope you found it useful. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe and send us your other games. We will be happy to analyze it from time to time. See ya.